Welcome to our viewers here in Nigeria and around the world. We begin with the United Nations concerns over the aftermath of the killing of Hamas deputy leader Saleh al-Aruri in a blast in Lebanon. Peacekeepers are worried there could be an escalation of the violence. Spokesperson for the UN force in the region says a wider conflict would have devastating consequences for both Israel and Lebanon, and urged all parties to show restraint. Al-Aruri was killed in a drone strike in southern Beirut. He was a key figure in the Izzeddin al-Qassam brigades, which is Hamas' armed wing, and a close ally of Ismail Haniyeh, the Hamas leader. Al-Aruri had been in Lebanon acting as a connection between his group and Hezbollah.
The Secretary General urges all parties to exercise maximum restraint and take urgent steps to de-escalate tensions in the region. I mean, he was very clear in that he's mentioned it, that this continued fighting has the risk of a great miscalculation by multiple actors, and I think this is what we've been seeing in different parts of the region, sadly. So we again appeal to all members of the international community to do everything in their power to prevent an escalation to the situation there. I think our message to everyone has been, is the same, that because of the escalating tensions and the fragility of the situation in the region, we are calling for maximum restraint from all parties. We don't want any rash actions that could trigger further violence.
Also concerned by the latest development is the wider international community, which has appealed for restraint as well following the assassination. France's President Emmanuel Macron has warned against any escalation in Lebanon. He expressed his thoughts to members of the Israel's war cabinet, Benny Gantz. The European Union's foreign policy chief, Josep Borrell, has added his voice as well, saying it comes down to other countries to come up with a solution. According to him, I believe that we have learned in these 30 years that the solution has to be imposed from outside, because the two parties will never be able to reach an agreement. If this tragedy doesn't end soon, the entire Middle East might end up in flames. Well, the Lebanese Foreign Minister Abdallah Habib says that he has also appealed to Hezbollah not to retaliate. Israel has not confirmed whether it was behind the explosion, but has described it as a surgical strike on Hamas. Well, as feared, there have been protests even in the West Bank over al-Aruri's killing and 6 other members of the militant group in Lebanon. His death was confirmed by Hamas and Hezbollah officials. He was considered Hamas number 2, and Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu had expressed the wish to have him killed even before the Hamas attack on October 7th. The Israeli military says it's on high readiness for any scenario following the assassination. Meanwhile, forensic searches are ongoing in Beirut as we await a response from Hezbollah. The streets of Beirut are crowded, shops are open, and press crews are all over the place. However, the main street where the killing happened has been closed to the public, and there are Lebanese army tanks parked alongside the road. Meanwhile, Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh is in mourning in the meantime, describing the assassination as a violation of Lebanon's sovereignty and an expansion of the circle of Israel's aggression against our people. He claims the repercussions of this terrorist act are the responsibility of the Nazi Zionist occupation, and it will not succeed in breaking the will, steadfastness and resistance of our people. Meanwhile, the head of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad movement also condemned the Israeli act of terrorism. In his statement, Commander Ziad al-Nakala said Sheikh Saleh al-Aruri was one of the distinguished and devoted leaders of the Palestinian people. He stated that we have lost him and we needed his presence when we needed his presence the most. He was a leader who instilled confidence and tranquility in those around him and those he dealt with. And there are also fears concerning Hezbollah's response to the assassination on Lebanese soil. Now, head of the Iran program at the Institute for National Security Studies, Sima Shine, in an interview with CBS, says Hezbollah's capabilities are 10 times more than Hamas, and that it's an army that is equipped much better than the Lebanese army, and that they have a lot of experience after they participated in the war in Syria. Hassan Nasrallah, leader of Hezbollah, the Lebanese paramilitary group and political party, is expected to address the assassination later today. Nasrallah's speech was initially to commemorate the anniversary of the U.S. assassination of top Iranian commander Qasem Soleimani in Iraq in 2020. But he could pivot to Tuesday's attack. The late al-Aruri regularly met with Nasrallah, who had been in hiding since Lebanon's 2006 war with Israel. And once again, UN peacekeepers have been warning that increased hostilities could prove devastating in light of the recent events. UNFIL Deputy Spokesperson Candice RDL says, "We are deeply concerned at any potential for escalation that could have devastating consequences for people on both sides." Hamas says al-Aruri will be buried on Thursday in Beirut's Shatila Palestinian refugee camp. But Hezbollah has warned his killing will not go unanswered or unpunished. In another development, the Israeli-Hamas war, the Israel Defense Forces have warned Palestinians in Khan Yunis to avoid combat zones, especially in that area. IDF spokesperson Lieutenant Colonel Avichai Adrei released a map on social media platform X showing areas they are to avoid. In the meantime, Yemen's Iran-backed Houthi rebels have fired 2 missiles towards merchant ships traveling in the Red Sea near the strategic Bab el-Mandeb Strait, following a report by the British Maritime Security Agency. UKMTO, United Kingdom Maritime Trade Operations, initially reported explosions near a cargo ship sailing between the coast of Eritrea and Yemen. It said no damage to the vessel and crew are reported safe at present. The U.S. Central Command says Houthi rebels fired 2 anti-ship ballistic missiles into the southern Red Sea, where there were multiple commercial ships, but none have reported any damage. The UN Security Council is set to hold a meeting today on maintaining international peace and security, which French diplomats said would address the issue of Houthi attacks in the Red Sea. Now let's bring in security expert Chidi Nwanu. He joins us from London. Chidi, great to see you today.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me.
Right. So Israel can, keep as quiet as it wants, but is it very likely that they were behind al-Aruri's assassination? What could change that perspective?
I think it's almost certain as one could be in this situation that Israel was behind its assassination. I think that's most likely understood by all the parties, and the Israelis have, in the context of this situation in the Middle East, have all but admitted it by stating, although they did disclaim responsibility, that it was a surgical strike. This is as much an admission of responsibility as anything else. And I think the wider question is obviously what they seek to achieve by this beyond neutralizing just one individual.
There have been, increased calls for restraint on the part of Hezbollah, but this seemingly unprovoked attack would warrant a response, right? And possibly an attack from the militant group.
So this is a very interesting question, that there is almost guaranteed to be a response. Now, what we need to watch out for is what is the level of response. Now, the response will most likely be a barrage of attacks, with both unguided missiles or rockets into Israel, attacks on Israeli military posts. But there is in the very, barbaric view of that region, there are limits to the violence which are understood. So there will be certain attacks which will be considered to be normal in this response, and there will be certain attacks which will be considered to be excessive. Now, if Hezbollah limits its response to what we would consider the normal level of violence, we would understand that they do not want to escalate this, and they're willing to, give their response and then stop the violence there. If they go beyond that, then we know that they have taken up what is considered to be Israel's challenge, and they're willing to escalate this war, at which point, the problems will increase.
Right, and the Israeli leader, as we reported earlier, was looking forward to a day when he would eliminate, al-Aruri. Do you think this could have been a targeted attack, or was it just a coincidence that suited him anyway?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think, as you've alluded to, Prime Minister Netanyahu has never been shy about, attacking what he considers to be Israel's adversaries. And if we look at it in the wider context of Israel's domestic politics, Netanyahu was in a very poor position even before this war started. He was deeply unpopular, facing unprecedented protests and opposition from the Israeli public about his attempts to amend the judiciary. This war has, while it has also exposed him, as a poor leader, it has also given him a lifeline in that as a war leader, it's almost impossible to remove him. He's formed a cabinet of national unity that, means that the opposition can't challenge him on anything. So even if we note in the recent days, just before this attack, the Israeli Supreme Court struck down those judicial reforms that Netanyahu was trying to bring in. Now, if he accepts this, it means that the extreme right-wing elements of his cabinet will leave his cabinet, breaking down his war cabinet. If he challenges it, then it means that the liberal elements of his cabinet will leave. So there will be the only way he can weather this is by some sort of strategic ambiguity, by ignoring the ruling or pretending that it hasn't happened or putting it to one side. But at some point he has to address it. And the other element is, of course, by doing we would say he's doing now, but continuing the war and making the argument that as a war prime minister, he can't be removed or challenged because he has to prosecute the war and defend Israelis. So I think there is an element of cynicism and domestic politics being played in here, but also we mustn't put aside the fact that, this was actually, from the Israeli point of view, quite a juicy and legitimate target for them. And, as somebody who is active in Hezbollah and active in planning Hezbollah's attack, and as somebody who categorizes himself as a soldier, a combatant, it was maybe a legitimate target, even if you can argue that attacking him in Lebanon and Beirut was a violation of Lebanese sovereignty.
And do you think that, all parties would listen to voice of reason as the international community and as the UN has been asking to exercise maximum restraint? That's how they put it. Do you think they will listen to all sides of reason? Do you think that Israel will still continue despite, having struck what I will call a gold mine in killing one of Hamas's top military advisors and, someone that planned a lot of their activities and what they were to do? Do you think the sides will listen to restraint? There has been a lot of, attacks leading up to this, big one that Israel has now committed.
So that is, again, the million-dollar question. Now, Israel doesn't listen to anybody except, the great powers. So Israel would be conscious of either its adversaries or its allies. And its key ally that, maybe can hold the Israelis to account is the Americans, who have so far been, whilst they've expressed public concern, they've been loath to undertake the concrete actions which would restrain Israeli activities, such as withholding arms supplies or, abstaining rather than vetoing UN resolutions. Now, the Americans, as I said, have withheld their kind of leash on Israel for now. If they choose to kind of apply it, which they're likely to do with this particular target, then that's where you would see the Israelis maybe respond. But as we've seen, the Israelis have been quite content to defy the Americans so far and not, play into their sensibilities. What's even more interesting from this point of view, is there's been now, a few hours ago, a bomb attack around Soleimani the former Iranian IRGC general who was killed 2 years ago. There's been an attack near his gravesite, killing over 100 people. Now, again, Iran has a lot of enemies. Soleimani himself had a lot of enemies, quite a long list of suspects, of which Israel is one. Now, if this is an Israeli strike, this is no longer a legitimate military target. This is a terrorist attack because most of the target, the victims were civilians. If this is the Israelis, then it is a definite escalation, and the response will be quite aggressive from the Iranians directly, which would definitely turn this into a regional war. If it is seen credibly to be the Israelis, I would strongly suspect the Americans will step in and apply pressure on them to stop. Because the Americans definitely do not want to go into a Middle Eastern war, especially in an election year. Well, not in any year since Iraq and Afghanistan, but definitely not in an election year. In terms of Hezbollah, they are more likely to listen to Iran. Now, as I said, Iran has just taken 2 hits. A Hezbollah commander who, at least by proxy, is one of their allies, and a direct attack in Iran itself. Iran, however, is unlikely to want a regional war as well. It's also likely to try and restrain Hezbollah as well as restrain its own response. What we are looking to see now is if there are any other attacks and what are the nature of those attacks. If they are in the same nature as the attackers around Soleimani's grave, terrorist attacks on what we would consider to be civilian targets, the Iranians will have to respond the same way they responded when Soleimani was killed, by attacking directly. And that, again, takes us to a regional war.
Right, and I was going to, touch around that. What kind of signal, does this give coming, on the anniversary of Soleimani's death itself about 2 years ago?
Yeah, the symbolism is key. The same way the October 7th attack took place on Yom Kippur, and the anniversary of the last successful Arab surprise attack against the Israelis, you see this attack on Soleimani's anniversary of his death. The symbology is clear, and the messaging is clear. What we don't know are the perpetrators. Now, the attack on Al-Ruri was clearly an Israeli attack, or at least, we could say within a certain amount of totality, it was an Israeli attack. This terror attack on Soleimani's grave is less certain. However, one can't, rule out that, for example, as I said, the Israelis are involved, but the symbolism is clear that this is messaging to the Iranian people and the Iranian regime that there are actors who are out there who are willing to take advantage of this, be it Israel or any other group or any other country.
And rightfully, we said that this might elicit a response from the other side. But seeing how this war, has gone on for a while, Israel has neither confirmed nor denied being behind the attack that killed Aruri. But how strong is Hamas anyway to be able to retaliate, or is it going to join forces with the others that are deemed Israel's enemies, as we put it?
So Hamas has been weakened quite badly by this war, both operationally and strategically. The success that they achieved on October the 7th, the operational success in terms of successfully attacking Israel, overrunning their outposts and their border crossing, was completely tempered by the atrocities that they committed and the murders and massacres of women, children, elderly. That, was a strategic defeat from their point of view. And operationally, the Israelis, through their fairly brutal attack on Gaza, have degraded a lot of their infrastructure. However, they are not defeated. They still have capabilities. But I do not believe they have the strength to launch any sort of a strong attack on the Israelis beyond firing rockets and, fighting in Gaza. The key threat now to the Israelis is not necessarily Hamas as a mass organization. As I said, it can still conduct small attacks, small raids. The key threat to the Israelis is Hezbollah. And this is why the escalation from the Hezbollah point of view in terms of the assassination and then now this attack in Iran is
Right. Chidi, I must thank you for your time today.
Thank you for having me.
Welcome back. United Nations officials are still worried about the humanitarian situation in Gaza, stressing that no place is safe in the Strip. It comes as 5 people were killed, including a 5-year-old child, after shellings hit the area of Al-Amal Hospital in Khan Yunis.
So I'm here at Al-Amal Hospital. It's a Palestinian Red Crescent Society facility, clearly marked with the Red Crescent emblem on the roof. And just 2 hours ago, you can see behind me and all around me, this area was hit. 5 people were killed here, including a 5-day-old child. No child in the world should be killed, let alone one sheltering under the emblem of a humanitarian organization. This war has to end. You can see just behind me the diapers. This was a space where babies were living. This is a space where children were living. You can see on the floor the blood. The world should be absolutely horrified. The world should be absolutely outraged. A child was killed here today. 4 more people were killed here today in a space that should be safe. But there is no safe space in Gaza, and the world should be ashamed.
Saying in Khan Yunis, locals are getting creative by making lemonades out of lemons. A damaged ambulance got into work as displaced residents can be seen using it as a barber shop. The back of the ambulance was used to store and charge their equipment while they treated themselves to a fresh haircut. The ambulance itself is seen as was destroyed with windows, a damaged roof and some missing tires.